Hey, what's going on, NBC Church family and internet world? We're glad that you're tuning in today for our Behind the Pulpit podcast. And, forget whatever's coming up on the show. I got a better idea. Let's just get straight to the chart. We've had a chart sighting, and that's the way I like to run things. All right, so check this chart out. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross put together the grief cycle. And this is an exciting chart. Look at it. It's wavy. It starts with phases, right? It's got different colors, and this is what happens when you go through a loss. You might recognize these predictable patterns where you go through a phase of denial, shock. Is this really happening? Then you get through anger, and then of course there's bargaining. Hey, why me? Can't we change things? I want to go back to the way it was. And then there's sort of a sad depression phase, and then eventually you move toward acceptance and you come out of it. So, hey, that's a famous chart, and I wanted to show that to you because we're starting a new ministry this week called Grief Share, and we're pumped about that. Thursday night. If you haven't registered, you should check it out now. We'd love to help you. We'd love to come alongside of you, and let's process that grief together as a church. What's up, Bob?
Well, I'm currently grieving the opening of this episode.
You don't like that opening? That's the way I like to roll,
just
man.
got right after.
I'm in charge today.
Well, the question, though, is that a chart or is it a graph? Yeah. How would you distinguish, though? Look a little bit more like a wavy graph to me than a chart. I'm not sure I would give my vote of confidence on it, but it seems helpful.
If there's no X and Y axis shown.
What is the definition of a chart? That's a good. We've been doing the segment. We should probably have defined that.
Chart is a broad term that is just a visual representation of data. It can be all kinds of charts. There can be bar graphs. There can be line graphs. There can be pie charts.
So what's a graph or a diagram?
A graph is a specific kind of chart that primarily focuses on relationships between data points. So.
So
chart is the bigger term.
All right.
AI overview from Google here, just from a quick search.
Thank you, man. Come on, AI.
A chart or graph is typically used to visually represent numerical data using elements like lines, bars, or pie slices, while a diagram is a
What about
broader
waves?
term. Or waves. So it says chart or graph focuses on the quantitative data, often with clear axes to show trends.
Graphs
and
are usually
comparisons.
the XY axis.
A diagram can include qualitative information illustrating concepts, structures, or relationships without relying heavily on numerical data. So do we need to rename the segment? Is it no longer a chart, or are these diagrams?
To quote the joint address of conference, nobody knows what that is. Nobody knows what
in a
that
country,
means.
no one knows. Where even is that?
Hey guys, welcome to the show. Before you tune out, it won't all be boring statistics and graphics and charts. We got a great show for you. We're going to be talking about 2 Corinthians chapter 6. We're going to be talking about some really exciting news stories that are happening in our world. And we hope that you'll stay tuned in with us. It's March 10th, 2025. We are...
that was quite the introduction.
We are well into the sunnier days, man. Yesterday was daylight savings time beginning, and we set our clocks.
Let's talk about daylight savings time.
Did you do your oven and your microwave yet? Have you
No,
done your car?
I did my car this morning when I got up because I was reminded how early it actually was. But no, since the cell phones just jump ahead, I didn't even need that.
The car is another level. Can you guys do the car? Is that because I feel like that's Jedi level. If you can just do your car.
I think my car does.
Some
it
people
for me.
just leave the car for 8 months and they just always know it's an hour off.
Well, my Subaru, which is older, it's a 2008. Mm-hmm. It's pretty simple to change.
It's like a manual button.
It's just like buttons up and down.
Yeah.
I haven't done my newer car, which probably is more complicated.
It probably is, man.
Although I feel like I should just be able to say, change the time. Change the
hey,
time.
Car, don't you realize it's March 9th? So hope you guys are adjusting. I love having more sun at night. You got Tim and Bob. Are you grooving with that? Yesterday it was 6:48 p.m. I looked out the window. It was still sunny. I still saw.
I do like that, although it did throw me this morning when I went to the gym and it was still dark.
Yeah.
That was a little weird.
The morning is darker.
Yeah, but I do like having the light longer. I don't like feeling like it's bedtime at 5 o'clock.
Now, I do wish we would just keep it this way and not fall back. I wish we could just eliminate daylight savings time.
This should be
altogether.
something else in the first 100 days of the Trump administration is to
Get rid of
eliminate
it.
daylight. There would be bipartisan focus on daylight savings
I think
elimination.
he said it was 50-50.
Daylight savings time should be. He did. He said it's too close and there's too much division, so he's not gonna make it an issue.
Him not making something an issue? That's crazy.
Yeah. So
When has division stopped anybody nowadays?
if you want to eliminate this from your life, you got to move to Phoenix, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
There you
hey,
go.
what's going on, guys? We got a lot of stories that are happening that we want to get to right away. So, what is happening in the news? All right, Pastor Bob. Number one news story: L.A. Lakers. Stephen A.
That's where
Smith
you
is
go-
on
that's
the
where you're gonna go,
sideline,
man.
and
You go straight to LA Lakers.
LeBron James. He's the first ever father who's got a chance to play on the same team as his son. He's encroaching the top NBA scorer. I don't remember who it is. Maybe it's Kareem or Bill Russell or somebody like that. But he's like right there. Not that many games away from him taking the all-time scoring title because he's like 40. Is he 40, 39? He's up there, and he's still playing. And, man,
40. He's ancient.
I remember
40.
when Michael Jordan was this age and he was like on the Wizards, he was slow. It was obvious that he had hit his 40s and he looked like a different guy. Like MJ in his 20s was whipping around, doing 360s, jumping from the foul line. You couldn't even catch that guy. He was faster than a speeding bullet.
sticking his tongue out.
But when he was like 40, he's like, let me just shoot the jump. Let me just do the fadeaway. I don't know about all this, razzle-dazzle stuff. But LeBron is still flying around the court. And, whether you love him or hate him, he's still got his athletic skills. And so, anyway, first time ever, a father and son have been part of the same franchise. Of course, Bronny was recruited, and there's been some critique about that. So Stephen A. Smith in the news talking about, was there special treatment because he was a family member? And LeBron, maybe not so much as a player, but as a dad, kind of gave Stephen A. Smith the business on the sideline, man. Sticking up for his son, saying, hey, show me some love. So, you guys following that story?
Saw a little bit.
I heard about it just before we started taping from you.
It's interesting.
So, but although we did learn that you need to be careful about some of the videos you might see on social media because they might not all be real.
So, yeah.
Now, if you heard, this is a thing, Pastor Dave.
It's called deepfake. So,
Yep.
I guess there's software that can, maybe generate a video of someone talking, and you may or may not realize this is not actually them talking, even though it looks like them. So watch out for that. That I think I might have been fooled by a Stephen A. Smith video, which may not have been him. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up after the show.
Although the
but-
essence of what happened was there, right?
Yeah, because it seemed like
it was an altercation.
He was legitimately speaking into this situation. But watch out for deep fakes and do your homework, do your research, and hey, stick up for your family. I think that's a legit way to behave as a dad. Strong
Okay.
fathers.
All right.
I'm talking about resilient fatherherhood here, man.
And
There
also,
you go.
quickly
Stay
in the
after
news, did you just officially take a stance on who's the GOAT, LeBron or MJ?
Absolutely not. MJ is the GOAT, but LeBron should not be disrespected. He is doing some stuff right now
He's made some things
that nobody's
happen, huh?
ever done before, and he takes a lot of heat. But he's a force to be reckoned with. But there will never be another MJ, so that's where I'm at with that.
All right,
So
there you go.
Next news story. What else is happening? In the news?
Well, we were talking before, and I think this will go into my third point. I don't know if there's any Jordan Peterson fans out there, but a guest we've had at the Underground, Katie Faust, was just on the Jordan Peterson podcast. And speaking of people giving people the business, she gave Jordan Peterson the business in this episode, talking about
It was unbelievable.
issues of family and
So Bob texted me this story Friday night. It was late. It was like 8, 9 p.m. You're staying up that late on a Friday? That's crazy. Anyway, so I'm like, he wants me to watch this right now, man. I'm getting drowsy. And then her post is, so this happened. And then she's got the video of her on the Jordan Peterson podcast.
an hour and a half discussion.
Legit interview. I'm like, okay, maybe this is worth me staying up a little later. So I watched probably 40 minutes of it before I had to say I'll finish this tomorrow. And she was like giving it right back to him. So Peterson maybe was he was open to her expressing her view, but maybe was not totally aligned with where she is on the children's rights thing.
Right.
And what he did, this is very unlike Jordan Peterson. If you know him, instead of presenting data and like peer-reviewed studies and, psychological journals and actually going with the sociology of it, Peterson goes with an anecdote. So she's talking about how children have a right to life, and also children have a right to their biological mother and father. And Peterson, rather than actually going the scientific route, which usually he's pretty, hardcore on that, he goes, well, I have a friend, Dave Rubin, who's gay, and, he's done a lot
and
to help
they had
to
kids,
make sure that his child's well adjusted.
They had a kid through surrogacy, which was one of the part of the discussions they were getting into.
So that was a weird angle for Peterson to say, well, let me tell you about this one exception in my life as this anecdotal story, and that should somehow prove all this research Katie Faust was bringing to the table wrong. And Katie just straight up said, Mr. Rubin and his partner, who's also named Dave, have violated their child's right to their mother, and they have stolen something from their child. I was like, whoa, Katie. Calling out Peterson, calling out Dave Rubin right on the podcast. And she is bold, man. She is like fired up. She is excellent speaker. And if you haven't watched that podcast, do it. Not right now. You're watching this podcast. But after this one, check that out. I think you'll enjoy what
Can
she
you
has
link
to
to
say.
another video on YouTube?
It's right here.
All right. Yeah.
There we go.
And for
go check that out.
Those of you who don't know, what happened was Peterson actually watched the Underground Sessions podcast and said, I think I got to have her on the show. And then
that was quite the bout.
And so Jordan Peterson, huge fan of the Underground Sessions podcast.
Well, if you remember,
That's exactly
Katie
what
Faust,
happened.
She was here live for an Underground a couple of years ago.
How many years ago? 3?
2022, I think. April of 2022, I believe. Yeah, April 2022 was right before my sabbatical.
She had just written the Them Before Us.
She had written the Them Before Us, which if you don't know, so she calls herself a child's rights advocate, and she basically looks at everything through the lens of a child has the right to their mother and father, and the child's rights should not, like a adult desires should not supersede child's rights. And a lot of times we make decisions for our own happiness, and it really winds up negatively impacting kids. That's one of the things that she goes into, and that gets into a whole host of ethical issues like IVF and surrogacy and gay marriage and divorce. There's a whole slew of stuff that she covers in that particular book. The interview that we did in the fall, she had another book that she edited. There was people that contributed to it called Pro-Child Politics, and she was looking at all these public policy issues from a child's rights perspective. So her and Jordan Peterson, they got into it. And
and what she says, her contention is that if you will actually prioritize the child and think about what's in their best interest, you always get it right from the perspective of personal decision making, and you'll always get it right from the perspective of policy making. And that's a really interesting rubric. I don't know anybody else who's saying it the way she's saying it. ThenBeforeUs.com. Check her out. Check out that podcast. Go back and see what she did at Millington with the Underground Sessions. She was excellent. Although, just as a criticism, she does not like time limits. So do not tell her that she only has like 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Yep.
She will literally tell you, no, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, and she's got
not the. You don't want to bind.
Tells
it's
her
like
story very bold. Also, she does a really good job of wedding together data and story, and I think that's the way to go. That if you just go with the left brain stuff with the data. People complain about the heart. If you just go with the heart, people say there's no data. She tries to wed them together on these particular issues.
Yeah, excellent. So go check out Katie Faust. Third news story today.
Well, it's not. It is kind of a news story, but it's just something to go along with the child's rights topic. March is Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month, and so. This is something when I had Katie here a couple years ago, one of the things that I think she hadn't leaned into as much, and I actually had, we're connected on X. I had messaged her about this if she knew anybody who was leaning into this kind of disability awareness issue as it relates to kids' rights. But I wanted to bring that up because obviously those of you that know our story, our son has a disability. He's got a genetic condition. You can see him there, Josiah. And I was reminded about this from the Colson Center podcast on Friday, that this month is all about making people aware that there are folks out there with disabilities, and they are people that we should advocate for. The National Disability Institute, I pulled this up, this goes all the way back to 1987. President Reagan, you may have heard of him, Ronald Reagan, recognized March as Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month to increase public awareness of the needs and the potential of Americans with developmental disabilities, and to provide the encouragement and opportunities they need to lead productive lives and to achieve full potential. So I wanted to make you aware that it is the Disability Awareness Month, and God does amazing things through people that in other eras would have been discarded, and in a lot of countries around the world are discarded and are thought to be a drag on society and don't contribute to society. And I just don't think that's true. And a lot of times we need to see life through a different lens and see how people with disabilities have a lot to offer us if we'd open our eyes. So that's a story.
You know, I was listening to Breakpoint this week, and Maria Bear was talking about this issue. You can go on their website. There's an article called How Christianity Changed the Way the World Sees
You can link it down in the show notes, Tim.
And what was interesting is the perspective that she took was, in the first century, there was a casual recognition that children don't necessarily have the same rights as adults. And she cited this ancient first century letter from a husband who was at war to a wife who was back home, and there was correspondence, and the husband said to the wife in the correspondence, "Hey, I know it's probably getting time for you to give birth to our child. You're almost at 9 months, and hey, we got a lot going on, so if it's a boy, of course, let's name it X. I don't remember the name. And if it's a girl, just leave it out to exposure to die." Very casual. Just mentioned that this was a common practice in the first century. Didn't make a big deal out of it. And then they went on in the letter to talk about like other things. The Christians, of course, came on the scene and decided to take up the cause of these children who were having their rights violated in that way. And then Maria Bear was talking about on the show, if you'll actually ask families who have like family members who have Downs or other disabilities, you know, what is the value of this person in your family's life? They will go on and on with stories about how much they love this child and how much of a blessing they are to this child, and what a tremendous source of joy this child has brought into their family and into their life. And that's something I think we need to highlight. And so in the month of March, let's do that. By the way, you were hanging out with Josiah last week. I don't know, walking around or something. So he was coming in my office, and I got a hug.
He did. He was giving hugs out to some people yesterday,
That's
too.
pretty rare,
church.
right?
Yeah.
He doesn't just do that to anybody, right?
He doesn't just do it to anybody, but he's a pretty loving kid. He likes to come up.
I'll try in
He's
there.
becoming more. He's a very happy kid, though.
Yeah.
I think for somebody who's been through a lot of medical stuff, he still finds a way to just be happy about the simplest things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, Bob, though, just seeing him walk around at church yesterday or just walk around my office, like he was like making a maze out of my office and figuring out where things were, trying to get to my laptop.
He will start tearing down your books. So you got to be
That's
careful.
what you told me. But just watching him walk around, that's pretty amazing, considering where we were just a few years ago. Everything was touch and go, and here's this little guy checking out my books. So
there you go. Might steal your books. He might come in and be part of the Great Book War.
All right. Awesome.
So there you go.
Was there another news story?
Yes, there's one more.
What do you got, Tim?
Something that I thought was interesting is that Pixar recently just put out a new show, and it is called Win or Lose. And they actually had an openly Christian character that prayed before a big game or something. I didn't watch the show. I just saw that it was a story. And there's a scene in this show before, I think it's a baseball or softball game, where this character says, "Dear Heavenly Father, please give me strength. I have faith, but sometimes the doubt creeps in," like making it very clear that this character is a Christian. And this is something that we haven't seen from Pixar or specifically like Disney in decades, any sort of Christian character or anything like that. So it's really interesting that, that is taking place.
So it's been 2 decades since there was an explicitly Christian character in in a Disney film. That's amazing. And so this was a softball game. There's a character named Lori who clearly is offering up a Christian prayer, and that's really something. So hey.
Well, does the cynic in me starts to say, well, are they just kind of reading the tea leaves on the cultural waters, and will they shift back if things change? But still,
trying to appease the Christian
yes,
audience,
but still,
sure
it's a good thing.
Canceled.
Yes, and that's where and that's the whole thing we were talking about with David last week. There seems to be kind of this resurgence of biblical narratives that are coming on the screen. Christian intersection issues that are coming out.
But isn't that the same thing that happens on the other side? So like they're all about the bottom line. I mean, let's not really pretend that they're actually
well, that's what I'm saying.
Stalwart bastions of values that no, they're trying to figure out how can we as a company increase our profits. And so whether that's pressure from, one perspective to say you got to have more characters like this, or pressure from another perspective. So I think it's okay for us to celebrate the fact that we appreciate the fact that you're
God can bring the pressures upon people to highlight the truth and the good and the beautiful in the world. So
right, and it's stories that reflect the audience, I think, are worthy of celebration. So that's a good thing. Thank you for bringing that to our attention there, Tim.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Good. Win or lose, check it out.
By the way, if you do want to wrestle through these cultural issues, we are starting a Colson Fellows program. I have the little pamphlet here that you can pick up. We did highlight this yesterday in the service. Seemed like a number of people were interested. And if you want to talk about issues like we've just covered on the news, especially the last couple ones, and talk about that in depth, this program could be for you right here.
Isn't there like a session with Katie Faust?
There might be. She was at the national conference. I don't think her book is on the reading list, but they do these twice a month webinars, and a lot of times they'll get people to come in and speak. It wouldn't surprise me if she comes
Lee
in.
Strobel on the promo video.
There you go.
They've done some stuff with Lee Strobel. Paul Gould was on there. That's how we got connected with him. Lisa Childers was connected with them. So there's a bunch. I wouldn't be surprised if Katie is one of the webinars this year, but I didn't see those listed out yet.
So that's our news stories, and now we've come to the best part of the show. It's a battle. It's a skirmish. It's let's just call it a war, because that's what it is. And Bob is like killing me
right
here.
Now. It's a massacre.
It's
I'm ahead by
7.
3.
It's not even. I'm struggling here.
You got to kick up the game right here, Pastor Dave.
Yeah,
it's a big week for you, man.
Well, here we go. I don't have a traditional book today. I have a different sort of
the bold strategies
piece of reading
are
material.
Continuing.
I'm trying to mix it up here, man. So, in the spirit of the fact that we are actually starting a new ministry this week called Grief Share, I brought the Grief Share workbook. So this book is interactive, and in order to get the most out of Grief Share, there is 3 essential components. It's like a 3-legged stool. You've got to do the exercises in the workbook, then you've got to watch the video teaching, and then you've got to come to the group and share and interact. So my push this week is, if you are interested and on the fence about signing up for Grief Share, go to that webpage and sign up. We'd love to have you here Thursday night, and you will get one of these books for free. We will give you the Grief Share workbook. There's lots of cool exercises in here. We're going to talk about things like the grief cycle. There's scripture memory verses in here, and it's going to be a great time. So this is kind of my double plug. It's kind of a church announcement / contribution to the book war this week. Grief Share, time-tested material. It's been around for a couple decades, and things don't just stay in print for that long without having some quality to them. And it's got a little leaf there, which fits along with the Millington Baptist Church tree imagery. So
in terms of covers, man,
also
that's
a very Lord
top
of the Rings
of the line.
leafy. Yeah,
there we go.
It's an attractive cover.
Very attractive cover.
Griefshare.org.
If you're judging a book by its
Is
cover.
the Kubler-Ross grief cycle chart in there?
I didn't see it yet.
Graph
but,
or diagram?
So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
I'm sure they have graphs in there, charts in there.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is kind of the person who coined the grief cycle. She did a lot of work with the dying, and in the 60s she would talk to them about what's going on, and she recognized stages that they go through. And then after that, she started working with the living and those who have been traumatized, and noticed that a lot of different kinds of losses in life are processed with the same kind of grief cycle. So she popularized that. We'll talk about it as a normal kind of thing at Grief Share. So come with us, and it's a good book for the book war. There's my book. How about you?
All right. Well, I I don't have a workbook, but I do like that cover and the leaf. I like your line of thought. So I have a book by Dan Doriani, who we've met. He's a pastor, seminary professor, and it's just called Work. So it's a very bright orangey color right here. It's Purpose, Dignity, and Transformation. And one of the reasons I was suggesting, look at this chart right here.
Whoa.
Pastor Dave, we're going to have to maybe use this for next
cycle
week.
with
it's
a triangle.
cycle. There it is. He talks about the foundations for biblical definitions of work. He talks about faithfulness at work. This is one of the reasons that I thought about this to tie in with the sermon. The application at the end about the unequal yoking with unbelievers we were applying to business and work dealings. So he's got a couple chapters on faithfulness at work, calling, working in difficult places. He kind of goes into that and offers some help. It's a really, really wonderful work. I would highly recommend it. And also there's a recommendation from Timothy Keller at the top here. He says, an important contribution, provocative and helpful, since we were talking about Tim Keller. Was that before we started recording?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, we were talking about Tim Keller before, and he recommends this book, so there we go.
All right. Solid choice. Very orange. Work.
So,
simple title.
I'm making some moves here. So last week we had the Great Bible Book War, and Pastor Bob came out on top of the Great Bible Book War. However, I got a text from a dear friend, DJ, who is a frequent listener of the show.
What's up,
week.
DJ?
And he told me that this podcast was perfectly timed because he's been in the market for a new Bible. He's been out of the KJV for a while. He's like, I need something a little different. And he went with the NIV Study Bible. And that got me thinking, why are Noah and I the ones who pick who wins the Great Book War? Why isn't it you? So now,
wow.
In the description of this video, there will be a link that you can click, and you get to decide who wins this week's battle in the Great Book War, and we will begin announcing the winner of the previous week next episode. So we will not know who won this week's battle until next week, but make sure,
Pastor Dave, we'll see.
Whether you are watching on YouTube or you are listening on a podcast platform, you can go into the description, click the link, and vote, and we will find out next week.
Tim, you're always keeping it fresh, always jazzing it up, always keeping us on our toes, always mixing it up.
I want to add a footnote to the section, some honorary mentions. I want to mention some periodicals that I consume. Salvo is a wonderful periodical. Talks about themes of science, sex, and society. So articles that are in there are things like how technology is reshaping our views of beauty.
Real flex,
choosing the natural over the artificial. Why AI relationships will never cure relational despair. It's got some really good articles. I'd suggest you check this out if you're looking for some periodical reading, as well as
What does salvo mean?
Salvo is like a statement, right? You're giving a salvo for the.
Is that Latin?
It is Latin, I believe.
Look at that.
Yeah, salvo is a declaration of what's going on. The opening salvo of the period.
I gotta look this up.
Yeah. Also, Touchstone Magazine of Journal of Mere Christianity. They have a wonderfully number of articles on different cultural topics. So I would this one in particular has America versus Europe: 2 Roads to Totalitarianism. That's the type of things that if you're a fan of like Rod Dreher, this is like the type of stuff that he covers would be found in this journal. So there you go, a couple periodicals if you want to check them out.
Not to be confused with Touchstone Pictures.
Not the same thing. No.
So okay, I'm confused. Dictionary in the Oxford says salvo is a simultaneous discharge of artillery or other guns in a battle.
Yeah, the opening salvo, the statement.
Like a deafening salvo of shots rang out.
Yeah.
But it's also used for verbal ammunition?
I believe so. Or ideas that you're shooting at,
Okay. In quick succession, like bullets.
Yep. I believe that's what it is.
I'm learning new words today.
Here it is, yeah. Right.
Not to be confused with saliva.
Here you go. A group of shots fired simultaneously, a forceful verbal or written assault. Here's the definition right here.
Assault.
A forceful verbal or written assault. That's what it is. There it is. So this is the idea here is that it is you are attacking bad ideas within the culture. And
here's that definition: the first part of a speech or the first in a series of actions intended to get a particular result.
Yeah. So some partner organizations are like Alliance Defending Freedom, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, the Colson Center, Stand to Reason, Reasons to Believe. So they got a lot of good people they work with right here. This is where it's at, Pastor Dave.
Are we doing periodicals too now?
Well, if you want to bring it in, I just I had them and I figured I'd talk about them.
Between you and Tim, I don't know what's going on.
These are honorary mentions. It wasn't part of the book war.
All right. These periodicals will not be a part of the voting.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that extra section from Bob.
We also would encourage you to not allow the periodicals to sway your decision in
what do you think about this cover right here, though, Tim? What do you think?
Real flex.
We've come to that part of our show where we talk a little deeper about the sermon. You can only do so much in a sermon. There's only so many minutes from the pulpit. People can only stand so much preaching.
Some people probably wish we did less.
The mind can only absorb what the seat can endure. So we got to let the people go home. They got to eat lunch on Sunday. But we got to debrief a little bit on Mondays. So
all right.
We were in the book of 2 Corinthians. We're in this resilient series, and we're like in chapter 6 because we leapfrogged over chapter 5. We'll get there, but we're in chapter 6. Bob, you're up. 60 seconds. What in the world is 2 Corinthians chapter 6 about?
2 Corinthians chapter 6. It is a, seemingly when you first read through it, a hodgepodge of ideas, but I think the main thrust is that Paul is concerned the Corinthians are going to walk away from their faith. They are going to seemingly receive the grace of God in vain because they are being influenced by cultural narratives around them, particularly around money and business dealings, which is what he gets to at the end of the chapter. So Paul continues some themes that he's been talking about throughout the first 5 chapters, but this, if you look at chapter 6, verse 1, there's a shift. He uses the word then. In the Greek, it's the dukai shift into a new train of thought, and he is basically calling the Corinthians here to make a decision. Will they accept him as their leader? Will they follow after him? Will they preach the gospel, or will they be carried away by the winds of culture? And he does a couple things. He goes on and he talks a little bit about his nature, the nature of his ministry and the suffering he endured. He tells them to open their hearts to him and to the gospel and not open their hearts to the wider world. And he chastises them at the end and calls them to remember the promises that they have as sons and daughters of God. Boom.
Also known as go big, go long, go deep, stay true.
That's true. That was the outline. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about
Speaking,
that.
this was a salvo from Paul right here.
It was.
In chapter 6. I should have titled the message that.
That was some verbal ammunition.
A resilient salvo.
It was.
Yeah.
So what does it mean exactly to receive the Lord's grace in vain? What are they in danger of doing? What does he not want them to do?
Yeah, so the phrase in vain in the original language really is getting at this idea that they're receiving something without effect, that it looks like you knew Jesus, that you accepted him, but yet it's not producing any kind of fruit in your life. You're still in the world and living like the world and not living any differently. And what he's encouraging them in this chapter is basically to be different, to have such an effect of the gospel in their life that they're going to go tell other people about it and draw them to Christ.
I noticed at the beginning there's this urgency. He's like, now, like today, like
is the day of salvation.
Sometimes I think people procrastinate their decision about Jesus, or they're thinking about, should I follow God with my life? And they take a long time to like finally cross over. And I think Paul brings a real sense that like you shouldn't put this off. Like, yeah, this is an important decision, but you should go big. You should like shove all your chips into the middle of the table and just bet it all on the fact that Christ is Lord and live your life for him. Go big, because like today's the day, right? So
yeah, sorry, thanks for reminding about the outline. So I talked about going big, going long, going deep, and going home. Or not
going home.
staying true.
That's what the audience was thinking as you were wrapping up. Like, how about go home?
It's time to go home. Go big was the idea of making bold decisions for Jesus and staying true to him. So we teased that out. And then going long was enduring the sufferings. But speaking of that verse you just mentioned, so Paul, throughout this section, does do a number of Old Testament quotations and
a hodgepodge.
A hodgepodge.
At the end, he's like mixing and mingling all kinds of stuff.
Picking and choosing to kind of make his points at the end. But in verse 2, he's specifically quoting Isaiah 49:8. So let me read that to you. Thus says the Lord, in a time of favor I have answered you, in a day of salvation I have helped you, and I will keep you and give you as a covenant to the people to establish the land, to apportion the desolate heritages. So a lot of times in Isaiah, the favor of God, the grace of God, which is the word grace that he's using there, falls upon his servant. And what a lot of commentators think Paul is doing here is he's actually equating himself with the Isaiah servant and using that as a call to action for the Corinthians. Like basically, the grace of God, the favor of God will come upon you as you're receiving me as God's servant. So now is the time to do that. And then he launches into this whole thing about the nature of his ministry and then calls them to open up their hearts. So he's giving them the business. He's pulling a Katie Faust right here on the Corinthians.
Right. And we studied Isaiah with Tim Mackey a few months ago, and we talked about these servant songs that are in Isaiah. This was part of the second servant song. And this time of favor thing is an interesting term. Maybe talking a little bit about Jubilee, like it's the ultimate Jubilee. Christ is going to set us free. And, hey, join in the party, right? Go big.
Go big.
That's cool.
But it's going to be a long slog, as you would say.
That second point. Now, let's
that second
get to
point, the go long.
So what's this go long stuff? And try not to depress us.
Well, I will make it brief. I won't go long on the go long part, but because basically we've been covering this almost every week. Paul, there's a key theme of suffering throughout the letter, and here is no exception. I think he's just going through and talking about all the things that are hard in our lives. He's got three categories. How
many things you put a number there?
28. 28 reasons to go long. But the first
talk about long.
The first kind of bucket was about troubles, and he's got three categories of troubles.
Yeah.
So he talks about the afflictions and the calamities, things that happen to us that are outside our control. And I've had that happen to me.
So
You've had
saw
that happen
a pattern to the 28.
Yes.
So at first it's like outside things happening to us.
Yes, and then secondly, in the trouble section, there was things that other people do to us. That was the beatings, the imprisonments.
People do to us.
Right, and then there's things we do to ourselves. So like going hungry and staying up all night and things like that. That was kind of the pattern in this first trouble section. But then he sort of gets into, we combat that with ethical living. So that's where he talks about patience and knowledge that comes from God and purity and all that. And then that gets into this kind of spiritual warfare thing at the end where he's got this weapons of righteousness on your right or your left. So, when you're encountering all these troubles and this suffering, you need to fight against. It's a spiritual war that you're encountering. So he's got these kind of three buckets of this long list of things that he does at the end, and then he finishes off by with a bunch of these paradoxical statements about I have nothing but I have everything, and he's really showing what the nature is of this long haul ministry in the section. That sometimes it seems like you don't have anything because you're losing all this material blessing being true to Christ, and then you actually get everything. You get all these spiritual blessings when you're true to him.
Can I just read it for fun?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Can you read it?
Can
you read it with a different voice? Can you read it with like a British accent?
I don't know. All right. Rather, as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way, in great endurance, in troubles, hardships, and distresses, in beatings, imprisonments, and riots, in hard work, sleepless nights, and hunger, in purity, understanding, patience, and kindness, in the Holy Spirit, and in sincere love, in truthful speech, and in the power of God, with weapons of righteousness in the right hand and the left, through glory and dishonor, bad report and good report, genuine yet regarded as impostors, known yet regarded as unknown, dying and yet we live on, beaten and yet not killed, sorrowful yet always rejoicing, poor yet making many rich, having nothing and yet possessing everything.
That was pretty impressive right there.
All right.
I felt like I was in the room with Gandalf right there.
That was my best Max McLean impression.
It was
there.
very good. It was very, very good. You can clip that out and just read it.
I was traumatized when I realized that dude's not British. That's just how he talks for his Bible readings. But okay, so that's a really poetic section. And I got to ask you about this last part, just to dive really deep. Having nothing yet possessing everything. What does that mean? That seems like a paradox. It's a little hard to comprehend. How do I have nothing and yet possess everything? Is this nonsense?
Well,
what does he mean?
No, I think it has to deal with material versus spiritual blessings, which actually I think if you go back to chapter 4, that's one of he talks about the things unseen versus the things that are seen. So I think he's getting at this, what's going on here, the temporal versus the eternal. So in the temporal world, it seems like nothing is going right. Things are bad. I'm losing everything. I have nothing. And yet, if you are remaining true to Christ, if you've received the grace of God, not in vain, you get everything. You get eternity with him, glorious blessings that come in the heavens. So I think that's what he's saying at the end. In the midst of all this suffering and trials and everything, it's all temporal, yet we have everything. If you have eyes to see what's coming.
A lot of times we think about like an inheritance, like we're in line to get something, maybe from parents or grandparents. We're like going to inherit something. And if you think about it, like Jesus said, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Like this, you're literally going to get it all. Right. We're going to get it all back, right? So Paul is future focused there. Thanks for the callback to chapter 4. That's why we go long.
That's right.
Like long game, man.
Go very long.
You got to play the long game.
Some go longer than others.
Some people look at their watch while they're preaching.
Yeah. This though is a continual theme to call back and remind Christians that this is the reason we can have hope, even when it seems like there is no hope, because of what's going to happen in the end. The end game, the long game. As Christians, I think we should play the long game. It's not just about what's happening right now and how I'm going to be satisfied. It's about what God is calling me to over the long haul of my life into eternity. It's like that you were
a long obedience in the same direction.
Long obedience in the same direction, or the Francis Chan illustration about the long rope. You live right now in this little bit of time, but eternity is like it keeps going on and on and on and on, and whatever suffering you go in this little piece of time, it's nothing compared to what's going to happen for all of eternity.
Which contradicts the prosperity gospel, which says, hey, right now is when you're going to be able to focus your blessings. Yeah. And it's all going to be in this life. No, actually, no. Yeah, not really.
Very true.
Okay, but third point.
Go deep.
What in the
Go
world?
Deep, Pastor Dave.
What do you mean go deep?
Go deep in relationship. So...
go deep. Open your hearts to us. We've already opened our hearts to you. Now you open your hearts to us.
Yeah, it's an interesting turn of phrase he has here in this section, because he's talking about how he himself has opened up his heart to them, meaning he loves them, he wants to be with them. But specifically, he's being truthful with them, so he's being frank in his assessment of what's going on in their lives. But
I love you. You're not loving me back.
Yeah. He's opened his heart wide to them. But the second phrase about you are, in the ESV, it says you are not restricted by us, but you are restricted in your own affections. And the translation can actually mean you are withholding your affection for us. What I think is interesting is, and you pointed this out to me as we were kind of looking through this, that Paul is calling them to open their hearts wide, show their affection to him, to the Christian community. But really what they're doing when we get to the fourth point is they're opening up their hearts wide to the rest of the world. And this is a tension that all of us, I think, wrestle with, that there's better relationships we can have, and yet we give ourselves so much to the things of this world, to the idols, which is what he's going to talk about next. And he's basically saying, don't squeeze me out of your heart. Let's go deep. Let's get to know each other. And this is an issue within churches, because a lot of times people just want to come in and dip their toe in, just attend and kind of get what they can get out of the message or the sermon or the programs, but not really give themselves to the community. And this is at least part of what Paul's talking about here, I think.
Yeah. And, I think there's some value in a season of trying to find the right church that is going to be a blessing to your life. But eventually, you're going to need to cross the threshold and make a commitment and give yourself to them and open your hearts to them. So if you're on the fence about that, I think the application here is, open up your heart to the church that you're a part of. If that's Millington, great. Open up your heart to us. Maybe you're not from Millington, you're from some other church.
Don't withhold your affection.
Don't withhold your affection. Yeah. Sometimes people are just kind of jumping into church and slipping out during the benediction, and they're not really seeing life in the church as integral to their spiritual formation. That's a mistake. So open your hearts to us.
Imagine if you were in a marriage and you were withholding your affection from your spouse. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, I think, what he's getting at here.
Yeah.
And that would be a pretty bad marriage.
It would be.
Yeah.
So you're in covenant relationship with the people of God, and open your hearts to us. All right, final point, stay true.
Don't be unequally yoked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is a verse that people probably heard, but maybe not thought about. And as I mentioned, a lot of times people are equating it with don't date non-Christians, don't marry non-Christians. And I certainly think that application is true.
First of all, can we just have a little fun? You showed a picture with like a yoke, and then you looked up at the screen and you go, and there's a horse there, and they're yoked with whatever that is. What was it?
I think it was like an elk or a yak or something. I forgot to look it up.
Definitely not an elk.
What in the world kind of animal
I'm trying to find
was
the
that?
picture.
AI?
No, that was the best picture that I could find. It would have been great to find like a huge, I think the image that Paul had in mind was a like a big old ox and a little donkey.
I do believe that is a species of cattle.
Is it really?
Okay, all right.
I'm looking at it now.
I did not recognize
I'm pretty
this
sure. I'll
particular
get it
animal.
up on.
There was a weird thing you found with horns that were really super long, and I can't imagine anybody who has a farm and needs to plow some land like, hey, here's a good idea. Let me hook up my horse to this guy.
unequal, yeah.
You guys here have some fun together. They must have had some. They must have had to get to know each other. Here we go.
There it is.
Okay.
What is that
What
thing?
is that animal on the left?
I do think that is a species, some sort of. There are some weird species of cow out there, especially
It
in
does
like
look
Africa
like a type
and
of
Asia.
cow. Yeah, I feel like I've seen one of those at the zoo somewhere.
Yeah, I'm gonna have. It's almost got like a dog like snout going on here.
Right.
Yeah, right.
But
I think the point here is that
like
is that
a
it's
humped
clearly
camel
not
thing.
as fast as the horse. The horse is going to run really fast and going to be held back by this whatever that thing is.
It's awfully veiny.
The horse looks like miniature as well. Like, is that
Yeah.
a real horse? It looks like a tiny little pony.
Maybe it's a deep fake.
It could be. It could be a pony, but the point is they're not equally yoked.
Okay,
they're
this
not going to run at
picture
the same
is so
speed.
interesting. What kind of yoke is this? They look like they're going to choke on the ropes. Who made this thing?
I'm gonna figure out what that is.
So let's talk about the spiritual application
Did
of
you
this
just
right here.
Google unequally yoked and that's what came up?
That's
I
how
did.
I did.
There was
it.
other ones that they just weren't as good, and that was the best one I found. Plus, it said don't be unequally yoked. So,
That sure was.
so we talked about three different areas of application. We talked about marriage and dating, and it certainly is great. And I would say if you're like a teenager out there, this is why like casually dating I think can be super problematic if you're not thinking for the long thinking about going long with the person. You can get in a lot of trouble, or you get emotionally entangled with somebody and then you can't break it off even when it becomes a problem, and you end up settling or whatever.
What about missionary dating? Do you recommend that?
No.
Why not? Maybe I'm
Well, why
going to be
can't
the
why-
one.
Well, what's the purpose of dating? So in my mind, the purpose of dating is for marriage. Mm-hmm. So the idea of casually dating, why don't you just be friends? Because once you start to get into dating and then we're exclusive, it's gonna there's gonna be a pull to lead into physical things, which should be reserved for the marriage relationship. Mm-hmm. So be friends, be good friends, but don't like if you're like once you're getting serious about dating, you're looking for somebody who could potentially be your spouse. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're getting into a whole series of things where you're just going to be emotionally hurt or get too close to the person that winds up not working out for you.
So it could deprioritize Christ
yes.
in your life.
Yeah, that person becomes super important in your life when really that you might not know much about them later on.
And it could cause the believer in the relationship to drift.
There is
you're going to get pulled.
a tearing of allegiance.
Yeah.
And then if you wind up getting married, it's going to be something that is going to last for a very long time and significantly impact you.
And if you're married, you got to make like pretty big decisions. Like, what are we going to do with our children? Do we want to dedicate them? Do you want to attend church on Sundays? What do you guys want to do with our money? Like, are we going to be giving, like charitable giving?
Yeah.
Or what values are we going to raise our kids with? There's all kinds of conflicts in your future that are going to happen, and you need to like foresee those and make wise decisions. Okay, so romantic relationships, it applies there. Second category.
We talked about friendships. We talked about how even friendships, maybe not at the same level of marriage, but they will influence you. And I was thinking particularly here about teenagers. You know, they always get upset, oh, my mom, my dad doesn't want me to go hang out with this person or that person. Well, there's a reason for that, because if you're hanging around people that don't have your same values, are you going to influence them or are they going to influence you? I always like to say, I think it's perfectly fine to be friends with people who aren't Christians, but your closest friends, the people that you're receiving your wisdom and your counsel from, should be people who love Jesus, so that they're informing you based on a biblical worldview.
We just talked about that on the most recent Fresh Wave podcast.
You
actually.
did? All right. What did you guys come down in the same spot?
Shout out to the Fresh Wave.
We actually, this was the topic of our high school boys small group on the retreat, where we kind of evaluated our friendships. And, we kind of realized that, there are issues that we'll have in our lives that, depending on who you bring them to, you're going to have possibly really different answers. And it comes down to your heart and worldview, and how it's so important for us to open up our hearts to our biblical community.
Yeah, very true. And of course, you want to be friends with people who aren't Christians because you want to be able to share the gospel with them.
Right.
But you don't want to be taking their advice on certain things when it's not going to be informed by Scripture.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
By the way, that is the Kalari cattle breed. It's native to India.
Kalahari?
Put it back up there, Tim. I want to see it again.
This was what?
KHILLRARI. It is a cattle breed. It's a member of the Bos indicus subspecies. That's native to
How
India.
quickly do they move?
It's well adapted
speed.
to the tropical area. It's favored in local farming, but it's in decline because of their low milk yield. So it's more for like farming and as you can see here, just like pulling.
But they're not going to run like a horse. Is the point?
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, I can look up the top speed of a Kalari cattle. I'll get back to you.
Can I call an audible right now?
Go ahead.
I know you're in the middle of your
How's this
sermon
referred?
thing.
What about the red heifers?
Tim, I sent you an email just now, and it's another chart. Okay, so
he was
this is the
looking at the animals, and all he could think
sighting,
was a chart.
And I want you to show, because like on your second point about friendships, it reminded me of one of the key Christian counseling slides that I use in pastoral counseling, that it's called the relationship funnel. So the relationship funnel is a chart, it's a graph that basically depicts the fact that relationships start broad and then they narrow over time. So like at the top of the funnel, you're going to interact with a lot of people in casual ways. And then as your relationships deepen in the funnel, with greater emotional intimacy and depth, there's going to be fewer people that can go to that level with you, right? So here's the chart. It's pretty cool, right? So at the top is more superficial. You're going to have a little bit more shallowness, and the disclosure and feedback is going to be less frequent. Disclosure meaning you're going to not reveal as much about yourself. Feedback meaning you're not going to share as much, critique or pushback at that level. And then as you deepen, you obey the scripture that says speaking the truth in love, and you have deeper disclosure and deeper feedback. So you're going to want to have the people at the bottom of the funnel be people of like faith and like-mindedness, because those relationships require deeper trust, deeper commitment. Not everybody should have equal access to all your deepest thoughts and struggles and vulnerabilities, right? So that trust has to be earned over time. It's not something you give immediately or to everybody. So your emotional intimacy, your spiritual intimacy, you should be choosy with friendships.
Well, it makes me go back to your comments about the Jordan Peterson and Katie Faust thing, where Jordan Peterson was making anecdotal comments based on relationships, not looking at the truth and the data. And that can very much happen to us. We get connected with people, and then, my goodness, it's all about, I have a friend, I have this, I have that, who, is outside the faith and this, and you start to compromise on things that are truthful.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Second category was friends. Third category of unequally yoked.
So this is one that I think people don't think about, but I think it's Paul's primary purpose for writing, and that is business relationships. And I mention that because this is what he's doing in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. He's specifically telling them, don't sacrifice meat to idols, and the primary place that happened was in the temples, and that was where business meetings happened, and the Christians were not pulling themselves away from those because it would sever and it would negatively impact their business. So the point was that doesn't mean you have to go quit your job, but it does mean that I think people should be wrestling with who they're partnering with and what companies they're working for. So that's a delicate balance. You got to think those things through. You got to weigh pros and cons. But my concern is that nobody is actually ever thinking about that. It's just, I go, I do this work, I make money. I had a friend in California. He was working for a company, and he became increasingly uncomfortable with it because one of their main products they put out was pornography. So I think eventually he left that. But could you work for a company that was their main product they put out as a Christian? There's other ones that are more gray, I think, in what they do. But the challenge here is that definitely we should be wrestling with that, and we should not let money and our influence in society pull us away from being effective for the gospel. And I think that is one of the main points Paul is making in the entire chapter.
So can we just do a little Bible geek stuff for 1 second?
Let's do it.
This is a podcast about Bible stuff.
It is.
All right. So this is when the New Testament uses the Old Testament, it's always something to study in depth. So this is what D.A. Carson put a commentary out.
Greg
the
Beale.
Old Testament use in the New, Greg Beale. This is like a patchwork quilt here. I'm on Bible Gateway, and there's footnotes galore. So the first one is, I will live with them and walk with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. The footnote goes down to Leviticus 26 or Jeremiah 32 or Ezekiel 37, or maybe it's like a conglomeration of all three.
Yeah, sometimes, and maybe it's worth mentioning, sometimes when the Old Testament's quoted in the New, it's not exactly like it was in the Old.
No.
Paul's kind of taking and using certain things to make a point.
Right. But in some way, he's somehow saying that believers are God's new dwelling place, and this was predicted in the Old Testament in a couple different places.
Yeah, that's right, the temple point at the end.
Okay, then the second quotation, my footnote goes down, well, it says, come out from them and be separate, right? That goes down to Isaiah 52:11 and Ezekiel 20, which that's an interesting citation there. Isaiah was calling the people to leave Babylon and remain pure. And Paul is now in the New Testament applying that to believers, saying, hey, remember who you are, and don't separate out from sin and darkness.
Which, again, isn't this is one of the key points in the Old Testament? Isn't God continually calling the people of Israel not to intermarry, not to connect with these pagan people, because ultimately they're going to worship their gods and not the true God.
Okay, third quotation, like I don't even know if it's third or sixth what we're on here, but the third one cited here is, I will be a father to you and you will be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. And the footnote goes down to 2 Samuel 7, which is the famous passage about the Davidic covenant, where God is saying to David, I'll be a father to you, you'll be a son to me. But Paul adds the clause, and daughters, which isn't in 2 Samuel chapter 7. So he's broadening it to the offspring of the Messiah, which are not just the sons in the line of David. It includes sons and daughters, all believers. We are God's children through Christ, and God is our Father. Now, that's an interesting addition there. He throws in some...
so is it almost like there's an expansion of the promise here?
Right. So this is an interesting passage, and the use of the Old and the New is kind of cool. So I thought it would be worth just noticing that.
But it is worth at the end, he does specifically say, we are the temple of the living God, and is an expansion of where God's grace is falling, but also he's concerned about them being in these pagan temples. So the temple of the living God should not be entering into these pagan temples and engaging in relations with them, whether sexual in dating, or which he talks about in 1 Corinthians 6, or in these business partnerships.
Yeah.
So it's a common theme he's using in both of these letters.
So in short, 2 words: stay true. Stay true.
There you go.
Anything else on your sermon?
Whew, I think we've covered enough.
Okay.
Let's end right there.
All right. We got a couple things to cover, but I don't know if we're sprinting today, Tim. So let's do that
sprint.
first.
Real quickly, the Kalari cattle.
This is going to be
we're back.
a title.
Can get up to around 15 to 19 miles per hour, whereas your common pack horse can get up to around 25 to 30 miles an hour. So
almost twice as fast. Right?
Almost twice as fast
That's
as the
the
common
point.
pack
That's
horse
the
to
point
the
right
Kalari
there.
cattle. All right.
Significant difference.
We added a lot of flesh to this already lengthy message right here. So there's a lot to unpack in this chapter.
All right. So
what are you doing next week, by the way? You're doing chapter 7 and 8?
It's chapter 7, which is about godly sorrow versus worldly sorrow. And then
speaking of the Kalari cattle.
Kalari cattle just came into the podcast studio.
Can you if you can work in the Kalari cattle into the message this week, I will buy you dinner.
All right, I'll try. Then he kind of switches subjects in chapter 8 to talk about like finances and giving. So I haven't figured out how this is going to work together.
How much does it cost to buy a Kalari cattle?
There you go. So yeah, we're moving on. Join us for next week.
Tim, thanks for doing the sleuth work over there. It sounds like that was a lot of searching.
Yeah,
it's all in a day's work.
Can we sprint faster than a Kalari
I hope
cattle?
so.
That's the
Probably.
question.
Well, you. There you go.
So today's theology sprint comes from a, what do you call it? Paul. Sorry. By the way,
You're doing this on purpose now, Tim. At this point,
Whatever that.
by the way,
whatever
it
that
appears
thing
you can
is.
get one for in between 25 and 50,000
pesos.
dollars.
50,000 pesos?
No, in the Indian currency. I'm not sure what that is. It's a foreign.
Nobody
money sign,
knows.
right? No one knows what that is. Anyway, so Paul mentions in for 2 Corinthians chapter 6 this idea that we are the temple of the living God, and he mentions similar things in 1 Corinthians and other letters as well. Can you kind of explain how that came to be, the transition from the temple to us as followers of Christ becoming the temple of the living God, and how that all works?
How it all works. Wow.
The concept of us being the temple of the living God. Can you explain that?
I can,
Go ahead.
but it's your passage, so I defer if you'd like to go first.
I'd be
Or I can
I'd be
go.
happy to kick it off, and then you can add or correct. So, of course, in the Old Testament, the presence of God dwelt within the tabernacle, and then later the temple that was built, that was where his Shekinah glory was. But then when Jesus came and walked on the earth, he was God in the flesh, bringing the incarnation, bringing God to earth. And then when he died on the cross, the gospel now is open to all. And specifically when Jesus died, we're told that the veil with the temple was torn in two, and now the presence, it goes out. And with the coming of the Spirit now indwells the believer, and we are the residents of God himself. So literally, the temple image has expanded to include the believers, and then we go and we fill the entire earth. So maybe you can add to that or sharpen it out.
I'm very influenced by Greg Beale and his work on the temple and the mission of God. And he talks about even before the tabernacle, the temple was the Garden of Eden. That's where God's presence dwelled, and man walked with God in the cool of the day. We enjoyed God's presence. Then, of course, we were banished from the Garden of Eden, and God found a way for us to dwell with him again, to fellowship with him again. And as Bob mentioned, there's the tabernacle, then the temple, and then, of course, Jesus is the ultimate tabernacle. By the way, the tabernacle was literally made of skin, right? So God taking on flesh was pictured there, that Jesus was the incarnate Son of God, took on flesh. And then when he dies, there's this sort of mobile temple going on where the Spirit now comes in power on the day of Pentecost, and we get to like travel to the ends of the earth and bring God's presence with us wherever we go. We are now his temple. One of the verses that strikes me about this theme is that verse that says, no one has seen God at any time. Now think about that. When you wanted to see God, where would you go? You would go to the tabernacle or the temple. But in the New Testament, where John is writing his epistle, he says, no one has seen God at any time. But when we love one another, we make his presence known. We get to actually image God to others. And so that's a great privilege that we get to be his temple and carry his presence with us wherever we go. And ultimately, our great hope is that his presence will be everywhere, and the whole thing will be a temple where God dwells again with his people. And so that's kind of the beginning of the Bible, the end of the Bible, and here we are in between the times, hoping for that day.
Well, speaking of books, I do have that Greg Beale book in my Logos library. I need to continue to make my way through it, but he's good on that. He's good on that point.
Greg Beale, check it out.
G.K. Beale.
You can't beat him on the temple stuff. He knows his stuff.
Boom. All right, what should we announce, Tim?
But first, we should announce that you can actually get.
Oh my goodness!
If you were to go to India, you can get one of these for $300 to $600.
Did Jesus ride into Jerusalem on a Kalahari cattle?
If you want one of those, so head to India.
It's kind of like a handle there. If you're riding it, you can like hold on to that thing.
I did the exchange rate for you. $300 to $600 US dollars for that. Anyway, let's jump into the church body life.
Annual business meeting, March 19th, 7 p.m. This is where we're going to talk about all the things that have happened in the church over the last year. We're going to do a financial report. We're going to be talking about some goals and initiatives for the coming year. If you are a member, we definitely want you to come because we have to make a certain quorum, but we want all members to participate. Speaking of not withholding your affections, this is something that's really important, that if you are a member, coming to the business meeting and understanding the life of the church is a key point. If you're not a member, you're welcome to come, but you can't speak because it's only open for members, but you can come and observe if you would like. Would you add to that?
Coming up. Exciting time. Hey, ladies.
That's all you.
Make sure you marked your calendar.
Hey, ladies.
Saturday, April 5th, 9:30. It's we got a couple different really powerful testimonies lined up for this. You won't want to miss it. It's a great way to spend a Saturday morning fellowship and be encouraged by testimony together. Yeah. And so mark your calendar, April 5th, tea and testimony. But this Saturday, that's coming up with the quickness. So please make sure you prioritize this for the men, for the guys, fathers. You can bring your sons. We have a wonderful breakfast prepared, and we're going to have some testimony time there, as well as Chris Acker is going to be sharing his testimony. Good time of worship. We got Doug Hewleen bringing some music with him. So, hey, listen, show up, 8 a.m. sharp.
I was told that you don't need to register because we're men and we just show up. So I don't know how they're planning for the food. But I guess just show up.
It's first come, first serve, I guess. So
yeah, you might, if you're not here early enough, you might not get to eat.
Yeah, come early.
Yeah,
it's gonna be awesome this Saturday.
Is that it?
Breakfast.
That's it.
Hey guys,
I mentioned the Colson Fellows thing already. Sign up for info sessions for Colson Fellows.
Yes.
And
is there a deadline?
Well, the info sessions are March 23rd and April 7th. So applications, we'll start taking those on May 1st. But you'll want to know if you want to do the program. So,
okay, so I can come to the info session even though I haven't filled out my application yet?
Yes. The info session is just letting you know what it's all about so you can decide if you want to fill out the application.
Perfect.
There you go.
All right, guys, that's a wrap.
Boom.
Thanks for watching Behind the Pulpit today. We will see you next week.
And we might be riding a Kalahari cattle.
Make sure you stay equally yoked this week, everyone.
Stay yoked.
Bye, guys.